these hostages look much healthier than the ones before.
Yes, yes.
So
I
that
guess
was
they were taken care, or they were kept by different bunch of people. They look much better. Baruch
yeah.
Hashem.
Well, but the whole thing is just I mean it's like I don't know like it's a very interesting time politically because it's like you have this dynamic where you have the Israelis and and they're going through the process of wanting the hostages back, but at the same time,
Yeah,
it's allowing Hamas to rearm and strengthen. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Especially with all these
It's
prisoners back.
yes. And what is the plans for Trump's plans of sending this 2 point whatever million to Egypt and Jordan? I don't think it's going to work because they don't want these troublemakers. Seems to be that way.
Yeah, but I mean the thing is yeah. I mean Jordan did already take on 2,000 Palestinian babies.
Hmm.
Yeah, they already took those on, and those babies obviously are going to be with their families, right?
Yeah.
So that was like a big shift in foreign policy just from that.
Hmm.
Yeah, but we'll see. I don't know. We'll see. Like with you know, at the end of the day, it's a problem for the government there of Jordan, and it's a problem for the Egyptians. To basically take on the displaced Gazans. So okay.
Well, I guess they just don't want them. They
Yeah,
just don't want them.
it's really unfortunate, and it's very
Influx of influx of terrorists into their borders. It's just asking for trouble. They're very happy to keep them in Gaza. They're just happy to keep them there.
yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Shalom, shalom.
Shalom, shalom, shalom,
Shalom, shalom.
shalom. Yeah, we're just kind of talking about the hostages and this whole
Mm,
process.
mm.
What's going to happen next? Since I guess because of social technology, everyone's like a political analyst now. You know,
Yeah,
so it's interesting times.
yep. I wonder what will happen.
Hold on. Okay, so I'm just going to say, so we are. Okay, so yeah, so okay, so we're let's just start this year. Okay, so we're in Parsha Mishpatim, right? And this idea of the different types of ways that like Hashem expresses himself, right? Okay, cool. All right, hold on. So let me go on the screen so we can have the same thing. Okay. Okay. All right, here we go. All right. So this is the end of where we left off the week before, right? At the end of so it says like this. It says this is it. So he says it says Vekol ha'ama ro'ima hakasho sorry hakolota ve'et hapidim. So he says, and he said, they all the people they witnessed the thunder and the lightning and the blare of the horn and the mountains of smoking. And when all the people saw, they fell back and stood at a distance. Ve amru al Moshe daber atada iyamanu anishta ma'a. And he says, and you speak to us, and you speak to us, and they said to Moses. And he says, and we will obey, but let not God speak to us lest we die, right? So he says this. So he says, "Ve'omer Moshe el ha'am al tira'u ki va'avur." So he says, well, and so he says, Moses answered the people. He says, "Don't be afraid, for God has come, and He's only in order lest you test you, in order that you fear of God, and you may be." He says that you a fear of God may be ever with you, so you do not go astray. Ve'amod ha'amam amar chotz Moshe nigash ala ha'arefel. So he says, and the people remain at a distance while the Moses approached the thick cloud, the thick clouds where God was. Ve'amar Hashem el Moshe kol te amar al bnei Israel atem ve'itim. So he says, and God, he says, and God said to Moses, "Thus you shall say to the Israelites, you for yourselves, I saw you. You yourselves saw that I spoke to you in front. That you spoke in front of. That I spoke. So I spoke to you from from the very heavens." So this is a significant point, right? Because this is like the basis of Judaism, right? Like we don't follow Judaism because there was this great prophet who had this crazy experience and he came down and he told us the truth and we should follow him. It's like, no. There was an entire community, hundreds of thousands of people witness God. It's like 600,000, right? Witness God in this revelation. And not only that, when you look at it from the standpoint as well, you also have to look at it and say, hey, you know what? Everybody was standing at a different place on the mountain, which means they all had a different experience with God, right? From their own perspective, right? And so that's another thing that there's all these different perspectives of how people were able to experience Hashem, just like it is today. And so it says, Lo tashun itiya elehem kesev ve'ele zahav lo ta'asu lachem. He says, and therefore, he says, with me, therefore, you shall not make any gods of gold, nor you shall make any gods of silver. Mizbeach arma, I'm sorry. Adamad ta'aseli vezi vachata la'ava et ol te'echa. So he says, and make for me an altar of the earth and sacrifice on it your sacrifice in of it says of well and be well your sheep and your oxen, right? He says in very place where I cause my name to be mentioned, and I will come to you and I will bless you, right? Ve'il mizbeach be'avinim ta'aseli le tashine tahen gezit. So he says, and you shall make for me an altar of stone, but not build it by the hewn stones, but for by the wielding your tools upon them. And and you for upon them you have profaned them. He says, Velo ta'alem, he says, Bala lo ta'alem mizbehi asher. So he says, and do not ascend my altar by steps that your nakedness you may not be exposed upon. So anyway, so the point is like this. So he's saying, so this whole last thing, he says this aspect, he says this last point, I just want to bring Rashi from this last point, right? So Rashi's saying like this. Rashi's saying, Shale yedei malot ata sirik le harhiv besif otecha. So he says, that's why the nakedness you be upon. He says, because on account of these steps, you will have to take large paces, and you shall spread your legs. And now through this, you will not be actually uncovered of one nakedness of the parts that you kept covered. Since it's written in Exodus, you shall make for them, the priests, a linen breach and cover the flesh of their nakedness. Still, you shall approach the large pace as near, though they uncovered one's nakedness, and may be described as such. And you should then be treating them, the stone altars, in the manner that applies disrespectfully. So he's saying the rocks that you're making are really holy. They're at a high level, right? And we know that there's different levels, there's different kingdoms. We have the rock kingdom, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, human kingdom. So we're talking about high level rocks, right? So he says, in the manner of which implies disrespect. Now the following statement, now the statement follows logically a story. He says, in this case, the stones which have no sense feelings to be particular about being disrespect to them. So he asked him a question. So what do you mean that the stones are going to feel disrespected, right? He said, the scripture ordains that since they serve some useful purpose, you should not treat them in a manner that implies disrespect. Then in the case of your fellow man is made in the image of the creator, who is, it's like a moral lesson. He's made an image of the creator, and who is particular about any disrespect shown to him. How much more certain is it that you should not treat him disrespectfully? Okay. Anyways, so the point is just saying like this. So this is the last conversation. And so now everything switches, right? Now, this is really important, right? This is really important because now we're starting to get these very explicit laws, right? And now we're learning about the laws of Mishpatim, the laws of, like, say, family, community, right? Mishpach, right? And we're learning about this, right? And it starts with this whole conversation basically about community. It starts with a conversation about slaves, a evet, right? A Jewish slave, right? And this slave, why start the whole conversation about a slave? Why not start it with a king or family or a general, something, right? Why a slave? Because the slave is the most vulnerable, right? And so the Torah encompasses everybody, even the slave, right? So when we talk about the human soul, right? The sages teach that the soul is broken into five parts: Chaya, Yakida, Neshama, Ruach, Nefesh, right? Five levels, right? And so the purpose of this experience of our soul coming into this world was to go through a process of tikkunim, of corrections, right? We are here to correct our soul. So what does it mean, correct our soul? It means that our soul comes down with this aspect of sharing, but when it comes into the body, when it comes in, it's the child is conceived. That light force now is now enveloped in this concept of the desire to receive. So we come down with the desire to share, which is godliness, and we come into the world with the desire to receive, which is this aspect of selfishness. So the whole point of our existence is to break past this selfishness, right? And to be an all sharing entity, just like the creator. We want to be like the creator. So the laws that you read about are not just laws that just saying like, okay, here are the rules of the Jewish people, right? We have our rules, you have your rules. No, this is the spiritual technology that allows an individual to correct their soul. You can do it just by following the precepts of the Torah and heightening your level of understanding, right? And then so through the course of that, through the course of this dynamic, then we do this. Another frame to look at it is to look at it in terms of where we at in terms of the human kingdom, right? Where are we at in terms of the whole kingdom, right? What does the human kingdom mean? That there's a rock kingdom and there's a plant kingdom and there's an animal kingdom and there's a human kingdom. What that means is it's like there's four levels of desire, right? The sages teach that God in the beginning of creation God wanted to make, God wanted to bestow his benevolence. So he created these vessels, right? And these vessels that he created are explained in four dimensions: inanimate, vegetation, animal, and human. These are the four levels. The highest level is human being, right? And so what makes the rock different than the plant, you can see that very explicitly, right? That the plant has a little bit more mobility. The plant receives directly from the sunlight. It goes in the direction of the sun. Even the plant gets rid of itself. It renews, right? So it's different than the rock. But nevertheless, they both have sparks of God within them, right? Sparks of desire. And a level above that, you can see the difference between the plant and the animal, right? The animal has way more mobility. right? The animal has the ability to gather, to protect, right? In ways that a plant kingdom, any type of plant can't, right? But they said the difference between the human being and the animal and the human being is that the human being has the ability to empathize and connect to things outside of itself, even things that are seemingly completely disconnected, right? On multiple levels, right? We could connect to things outside of us. Animals cannot do that, right? And so, this idea of being able to understand that animals do not have this ability, but humans do, allows us to understand the concept of God, right? This ability to connect to something beyond us, beyond our even our ability to comprehend. That's what God is, and we can still connect to it. An animal can't do that, right? And so the idea is to say that the whole spiritual system, if you want to make it like so easy, the whole spiritual system is understanding that God is fueling all the levels of desire. All the kingdoms are being fueled by God. That's why the world is alive. But the human being is the only one that has the ability to acknowledge that God is the provider of everything that it's receiving. And so the whole spiritual system of the 613 laws, right, which we're going to be learning about through this whole process, from Matan Torah, right? That we're going to learn that these 613 laws or technology points, right, are exactly the blueprint, the GPS of the soul, right? Because the soul, in the same way that there's 248 positive commandments, things that we should go after and do, and there's 365 negative commandments that we should stay away from, we should abstain and distance ourselves from, right? By doing that, we acknowledge the source of creation. We acknowledge that this is Hashem that's providing this life. When we say a bracha over food, we're acknowledging this pleasure is coming from Hashem. That's it. That's the purpose of creation, right? So I want to bring a teaching from Rabbi Nachman. And his teaching of Rabbi Nachman will allow us to kind of understand the destination, right? This destination, because it's not just, we're doing this and we have a religion and there's all these other religions, especially in India. I know there's a lot of religions, but it's not that. We have a spiritual system that allows us to complete the purpose of creation, because it wasn't enough that God was to bestow upon us, but rather that we had the ability to recognize, we had the ability to recognize we had the ability to recognize where God, that is coming from the source of creator. So I want to talk about this concept of completeness, right? Because that's the ultimate level that we're trying to go. We're trying to become complete, right? And so we want to say we want to be complete, meaning that we're able to fuel all parts of our body with kedusha, with light. And that light that fuels our body comes to the soul. And the soul receives its light from the creator. And as we recognize that, right, we connect. All right, so let's go into this. This is Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. And these are a lot of really amazing short essays that can really help us, internalize in these things. But it's not enough to read the Pasukim, right? What we're doing now, I'm giving you an introduction to this Parsha. This parsha of Mishpatim, this new legal system, right? And I'm giving you an introduction saying this is where we're going to. This is the destination. So when you're reading it, read that all these things are there as mechanisms that allow our soul to receive light. And as our soul receives light, it fuels all the different parts of our body. And as we fuel all the parts of our body, we are bringing light to the world. And anytime we do something against the Torah, we create a blockage in that area where we're supposed to stay away, that 365 places that we're supposed to stay away. When we go and do it, we actually create a separation, right? We create a separation, right? And so we create a separation, right? And so that separation doesn't allow that part of the body to receive light. And that's where a lot of the illnesses come from. A lot of the illnesses that we have is because there's a particular part of our body that's not receiving the light of a particular mitzvot. And there's some type of blockage we created in that particular area. And what is the proof? When a person dies, what happens? The whole body withers away. Okay. So it says Ikar Kabbalat Ola Malakut Shemaim Lahu Al Yadei Shemishalikin. So he says like this: simplicity. He says, take on the yoke of the heavens. To take on the yoke on the heavens, we must abandon all of our sophisticated ideas and walk in the path of purity and simplicity. He says, and the Holy Torah is the only true wisdom. All the other ideas are nothing in comparison. This is from Rabbi Nachman. Siri kol echad hashlik ala hachavot. He says, "Vele avod ed Hashem yivarech." So he says, people should throw aside all of their sophisticated ideas and serve God with purity and simplicity. Action in is the main thing, not studying. He said action is the main thing, not just studying. And you should see to it that your practical achievements are greater than your intellectual developments. It is obvious that this applies to the wisdom of the average person, which is nothing which is nothing but foolishness. Without doubt, this has to be thrown out completely. But it even applies to genuine wisdom. When it comes to serving God, even someone whose head is filled with genuine wisdom should put all of it aside and serve God with purity and simplicity. At the time, it may even be necessary to behave in a way that seems seems mad in order to serve in order to serve God. We may have to do things which may seem crazy for the sake of carrying out his will. We may have to roll out about all kinds of mud and mirrors in order to serve God and to fulfill the commandments. This does not only this does not only apply this does not apply only to things which are explicitly mitzvot. Anything which serves God to be done is called a mitzvah. It may be necessary to throw oneself into the mud and mirror to carry out a certain action that will be pleasing to God. So he's just saying, getting to the point of saying like, this don't make God in your head. Live it. Live these precepts of the Torah. Live these commandments. Why? Because that's how you draw the light. Right? It's one thing to know it in your head, I should do this. It's another thing to I know and I do. Right? To do it is the main thing, not I say, right? And so he says, and when one loves of God is strong enough, he will become a precious and beloved son, and God will show him abundant love and compassion, and permit him to investigate hidden store chambers of king until he will learn the deepest secrets of all, why the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper, and so on. He will be worthy of secrets of Torah, and he will be able to rise up judgment out of the depths and restore it. And he says, Ka she Adam holek achar shekilo leka chamot yuchala lipol. So he says, and someone who follows his own ideas could easily fall into all kinds of traps and get into serious trouble. God forbid. Too many people have been led astray by their own wisdom. He said they themselves have sinned, and they have caused many others to sin as well. And all because of their fallacy wisdom. The essence of Jewish religion is to follow the path of purity and simplicity without sophistication, simply to make sure that God is present in all things one does. No one's thought at all of your honor and glory. The only question whether God's glory will be enhanced. If so, do it. If not, then don't do it. But this is the way you will never stumble. So he's saying like this. He's saying that like, you got to stay humble, right? And you have to have an aspect of you that, yeah, you know the secrets and the Kabbalah and all the stuff, but you have to have an aspect of simple faith. right? Which is doing what the Torah says, doing it with no agenda, and just doing it because the Torah says do it. God says do it, you do it, right? And sometimes you have to do extra things, right? And you got to go outside of yourself to create that excitement. You know, you have to be excited for the mitzvah. You got to live the mitzvah. You got to do the action, right? So he says, Kaver, he says, Meva Arm, She Ikar Ha'avodah Tamimuta She Uf Situt Beli Machamot. And so he says, and besides simplicity and purity, you should understand that there's no need to search for specific strict practices to be upon yourself, to think that think that you should is an illusion. Hold on. Okay, great. Okay, so let's keep going. Okay, so okay, it's like this. Oh, let me get the screen back up. Okay, so yeah, so it's like this. So what we're talking about now is this idea of the humility of following the wisdom of our sages, right? And to understand that as much as it is to be very sophisticated and have very high ideas, but the simple understanding of the mitzvah and following that simple level of the mitzvah is humongous, right? And it changes worlds, right? And in that aspect. So he's saying here, he said, besides simplicity and purity, right? What we're just talking about. He says you need to be, he says you need to understand that there's no need to search specific strict practices, to take upon yourself, to think that you should is an illusion. It is simple, it is simply one of the devices of the evil one to deter you from serving. So some people think, you know, that in order to go to that next level, right? I got to take on all these like humarot, all these stringencies, right? And he's saying, no, you don't got to do that. Simple faith, simple faith. Do what the Torah says. You don't. It doesn't have to be all sophisticated in this and these different things. It's like no, it's not that. And so he says it is simply one of those devices, the evil inclination. He says such practices are not a part of serving God. This is Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, right? This is I'm not even. I learned from all the sages, right? One of the best classes that I learned in yeshiva. When I first started off at the yeshiva called Or Sameach, and then I went other places. But one of the classes that they had was really impactful to me was Jewish literature, right? And so when we were able to, they opened up the whole gamut of not just all the different authors and the writings, but the writing styles and the way to read it and to understand how to learn it and to understand that even we took a lot of the lessons of how we learn the Gemara and the structures to understand how these writers are writing, right? So for me, I learned from everybody, right? I went through the Litvish yeshiva system, but I learned from everybody, and I learned at a Kabbalistic yeshiva too. So I'm very much into that. So the sages say like this: the Torah was not given to administering angels; it was given to men of flesh and blood. It says it's in Kedushin. These exaggerated practices can put you off completely. And the greatest wisdom of all is not to be wise at all, but it is simply to be pure and straightforward, being truthful, right? And so this is not like intellectual practice, right? Intellectual practice is like, oh, okay, well, you know what? I remembered a bunch of facts, and I'm really smart, and I learned a bunch of Gemara, and these types of things, which is good. I mean, it's very good. But what matters more is how we treat each other, right? How we connect, how truthful we are about where we're at in life, and being able to use the kedusha of the Torah to fix those voids, right? Those places where we're lacking light in our life, right? And that's what he's saying, being in a place of emet. He says, Ha chachamot mazikina me'oda le'ha'adama ve'chachmaim neki din. So he says, this sophistication can be very harmful. Thinkers are easily trapped in their own wisdom. Keep well away from the wisdom of those self-important people who believe that they're great truths about serving God. Their wisdom is nothing but foolishness. All their sophistication is quite unnecessary in serving God. The main thing is to be pure and simple and have faith in God and His Siddiqim. True, you may be very careful that you're being true. You have to be very careful that you're being pure and simple as opposed to idiotic. But the sophistication is entirely unnecessary. Simple purity and faith can bring you great joy. So we continue on. So he's saying like this. He's saying that God knows what level all of us are at, right? Everyone's had different life experiences. We all have different levels. But the reality is that God speaks to us at our own particular place, right? That's what we learned on Mount Sinai, right? With all the Jews, all the hundreds of thousands of Jews that were there, God spoke to them as a collective, but it was still an interpersonal conversation for everybody, and that's what unified them. Not that they all heard the same thing, but they all heard, right? And that's a very important point. So it's just the focus on this idea as we go. Ze ikar hachama. So he says the greatest sophistication is to work out how to avoid sophistication. So don't be overly genius, right? Live a righteous life. He says, "Sarik li zahar le kayam ve'haverot ha pekutot Gia. Sorry about that. I got distracted. It says Vehamin Chagin. So he says like this. He says, and therefore you should be very careful to follow the simple devotion and customs of Israel, singing songs on Shabbat, and at the conclusion of Shabbat, the similar practice. It is good to recite many prayers and supplications, such as those printed in the large prayer books. People think it is clever to ridicule these practices, but they are wrong. They are the essence of Judaism, is simplicity and purity, and without sophistication at all. And Rabbi Nachman leaves us with a blessing. He says, "Blessed be he who gives strength to the weary and power and courage to the weak." Any thoughts, any reflections?
Yes, Rabbi. Shalom, this is Juliet.
Shalom.
Yes, Rabbi, many of the things that you spoke about, yeah, are Kabbalistic in nature. So Rabbi Nachman of Breslau was able to, write about it and comment on the path of the Creator. Yeah, the laws of nature and things like we are born with an ego and how ego is toxic. And what I know from the book of Zohar, uh, ego from the writings of the Ari and Bala Sulam and Rabash and all these Kabbalists, that our ego influences the world. It influences even the wars in between Israel and Gaza, Hamas as well. So, throughout the day, we go through different states where we have to push down our ego, but we can't bring it down to zero, and we have to annul ourselves in front of others. Yeah.
Yep.
And, through our connections with people, if our connections are pure and holy, and if we go to the Creator and ask Him for the blessings of others, pray for others and not ourselves. If we pray for ourselves, we hurt our soul. Our soul doesn't develop. And the Creator sends people, that irritate us or trouble us, just, like poking us to connect with Him. Yeah, all the time. So everything is the Creator's doing. Yeah, we can't get angry with anyone. And in fact, we influence the entire world. The world is within us. And the literature that we read, yeah, the literature that is going to be that we're going to read in the years to come, in the next 215 years, will in fact, correct our souls. And only when our souls are corrected, we will not find the fault in anyone around the world, in anything around the world. That's when we have finished 125 degrees of spirituality. Yeah, so there are the like Balasulam, he had achieved the 125 degrees, and what's his name, Bal Shem Tov, yeah, who's buried in Ukraine. So they could not find any fault in anyone, and whatever fault we find in others and what we see around us is actually what we are seeing of ourselves. We are just seeing a mirror. Life is an illusion. The Creator creates that mirror, and we see exactly what we are going through, the states we are going through, whether it's war, whether it's destruction, whether it's fire, whether it's earthquake. We are just seeing the states that we are going through. Yeah, and only when we, climb that 125 degrees or 125 steps of the ladder, we will be, we are one with the Creator. Yeah, so uh, something on just spirituality and the writings of the Ari and yeah, the book of Zohar, which is the eternal book. And our Torah, what they say is actually at a much lower level. We have to ascend to a much higher level. Yeah, so that the Torah of the Atzilut is much higher. So our states have to ascend much higher, yeah, in the world. And in the next 10 years, spirituality will become something very common, is what my teacher told me. He's a Kabbalist as well, and he said in the next 10 years, it will take for spirituality to become very common with one. The most important thing is no pride. We should not have the will to receive for ourselves. We should be connected with others and pray for others. Yeah. So these are some of the principles embodied in that teaching.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Rav Lakai.
What were you gonna say?
Thank you. I just wanted to share this with you.
No, no, that's very, very, very powerful, especially the idea about the Torah of Absolute in Bria, Yitzira, and
Yeah,
Asya.
yes,
That's a
yeah.
very interesting
And
thing.
whatever we do, if we are egoistic, everything in the world falls down with us. Everything, all the four forms of creation that you mentioned, that is the still, the animate, the what is the vegetation,
Plant.
the speaking. Yeah. If we do not control our emotions, yeah, everything suffers in the world. Everything. Yeah. And when we see something happening, it's actually because of our pride and our sinful nature that we are seeing as an illusion outside. So we can't laugh at it, comment on it. We have to look at our inner state and examine our state. And we are actually the same generation, the first generation, which is reincarnated according to spirituality. And we are here because our states are not corrected. Yeah, so it'll take, if I'm not corrected and go through the 125 degrees, I'll be redressed and I'll be dressed again and bought. My soul will be dressed and brought again. Yeah, till for the next 215 years, till it is corrected. Yeah, so we are the same generation that is reincarnated into this earth according to the book, according to the spiritualists who have written in the past. Yeah, so I can't be angry with anyone. Yeah, I just can't be because it's the creator's doing, and I can't find fault with anyone because the creator is actually, I can't interfere with anyone's correction because the creator is so perfect in his doing.
Yeah, you're right.
Yes.
You're
Think
right.
about
You're right. No, I thank you for that. And all these things are so important going into this parsha because we're acquiring the tools, right, to do exactly what was just spoken about in terms of the soul's correction. We're getting those tools through this through these parshiot. And that's why we can't just look at it as rules, but rather spiritual technologies that allow to correct ourselves. Anybody else? Any other last statements before we leave?
Very good, Rabbi.
Okay. Okay, so God willing, we'll be back again next week. Please go through the parsha. Please see it as a mechanism for the correction of the soul. And all these are the tools that allow us to do that. And we should continue to pray for the hostages to be brought back, and the hostages that are there, that are alive, that their suffering should be eased, and their family suffering should be eased, and all the bodies that are all the people who passed away, that their bodies are returned quickly to their families and they could be buried
Amen.
properly. And just continue to pray, continue to pray. And as was said beautifully, is that our actions determine. We want to bring peace to the world. We want to see violence. We want to protect our Jewish brothers in Israel and in India and in Indonesia, in Europe and Africa and throughout the Middle East. We have to change our behavior. Our behavior is the greatest tool to use to stop violence and hatred in the world. Loving our fellow Jew, loving our fellow human is another mechanism to bringing healing to the world, right? So the love that we give, the love between couples, right? When two couples show kindness to each other, that sends a spiritual vibration that removes the thought of terrorism from a person. Like a person may walk out of the house with this intention to do something really bad, and because this energy is in the world between two couples, it hits them like in the head, and all of a sudden he has no hatred. He can't do it, right? So these things happen all the time. We just don't know about it, right? So we want to continue on and be in this place of using love, using caring, using the halacha as all mechanisms to bring us closer to Hashem, but bringing Hashem closer to the world, which removes pain and suffering. So we'll end here. Baruch atah Adonai.